My aunt raised me when my parents walked out on me at 15. She was strict, stubborn, but she loved me in a way they never did. Last year, cancer took her from me. At the will reading, I found out she had left me everything, a house in Portland's Laurelhurst and $2 million. I barely had time to process the loss when the door opened. My parents, the very people who abandoned me, strolled in like nothing happened. They smiled. "We're your guardians." My chest went cold. I wanted to laugh, to scream, but then my lawyer walked in with a file. Their faces drained of color, and in that moment I knew this wasn't about family. This was about money, lies, and the kind of betrayal that doesn't heal. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Damian Hawthorne. This is not just a story about inheritance, it's about abandonment, survival, and what it means to find family where you least expect it. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel. Every view, every comment, every bit of support reminds me that even in the darkest chapters, someone out there is listening. Grief doesn't shout. It sits beside you in a quiet office that smells like walnut and old books and rain-soaked coats, and it waits while the lawyer reads your name. I sat across from Leonard Grayson that afternoon in downtown Portland, watching drops slide down his window like metronomes, and tried to hear Clara's voice instead of his. He cleared his throat once, then again, then said the words that felt both heavy and unreal. I was the sole beneficiary of Clara Beaumont's estate, $2 million, a craftsman mansion in Laurelhurst, and controlling shares in her interior design brand. He slid a leather folder across the desk. My name embossed in gold. A house key taped to a card. The Montblanc pen Clara gave me when I started at Reed rested in my pocket like a steadying hand. Clara prepared everything early, Grayson said. That was her way. She liked to be one step ahead. I nodded, swallowed, and tried not to show how the floor had shifted under me. Across the room, Mrs. Evelyn Porter, Clara's housekeeper and the closest thing I have to a second conscience, folded her hands and offered a small, tired smile. The rain picked up, thunder far off. When the door opened behind me, the air changed. I knew the cadence of those footsteps before my brain caught up. Travis and Marla Hawthorne, my parents, walked in wearing expressions they must have practiced in the mirror. Damian, my mother said, soft and shaking as if we had left off yesterday and not 15 years ago. My father's smile made a sound in my head like a knife coming out of a drawer. "We're your guardians," he announced to the room. "Not to me. We're here to help." This is a lot for a young man. I looked at their eyes and then at their hands. Their gaze kept drifting to the folder on Grayson's desk. Their fingers twitched when they caught the gleam of the key card. I didn't stand up. I didn't hug them. Instead, I counted my breaths, kept my voice level, and said nothing at all. The only sound was the pen in my pocket tapping once against my ribs when my heart jolted. Grayson didn't shake their hands. He slid on reading glasses, and with the careful patience of an ER doctor, read a clause Clara had called a safety addendum. For the first 6 months, any major financial decision I made would be vetted by independent counsel, someone not named Grayson, to slow down grief and fend off bad actors. He didn't look at my parents when he said bad actors, but the words hovered over their shoulders like damp coats. "That isn't necessary," my father began. "We'll help him avoid mistakes." My mother nodded too fast, her eyes glistening with a shine that felt staged. "We only want what's best for our son." My throat burned. The word son landed like a stone dropped into shallow water. I still said nothing. I let Grayson turn pages initial where he indicated and watched how my parents tracked every movement as if following a tennis ball. The walnut shelves behind him were lined with spines Clara used to love. Pattern histories, business ethics, biographies of stubborn women who built things that lasted. I thought about how she'd run a fingertip along those books and tell me to look for themes. Look for the invisible threads. My phone buzzed in my jacket. A Portland number, Cassandra Wade. I knew her name from the company Quiet Precise, the banker Clara trusted when money needed to move carefully and paperwork needed to be airtight. I didn't open the message. Not yet. Grayson finished the formalities. "There's more for you at the house," he said. Voice gentler now. "Clara kept a private archive. Notes, recordings, things she thought you should have when the time was right. Mrs. Porter can help you find it. Private archive. Notes. Recordings." The words made the room colder. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, as if we were teammates. "We can help organize everything at the mansion," he offered. "Save you from the chaos." "The property has security cameras," I heard myself say evenly. Clara liked to see one step ahead. Something flickered across his face. My mother's smile wilted and returned like a plant under a heat lamp. I tracked how they looked at each other before they looked at me. Performances always need partners. Grayson closed the folder and pushed a small tray toward me, the key to Laurelhurst, a card with codes, and a sealed envelope pressed with red wax stamped CB. The wax was perfect, not a smudge, not a crack. Clara's kind of perfection. "This is for you," he said. "Open it when you're ready. She wanted you to feel her with you." I slipped the envelope into my jacket beside the Mont Blanc, and for a second I could smell cinnamon and polish from Clara's kitchen, could hear her telling me to tune my guitar, to sit up straight, to be braver than my fear. My parents stood eager, as if the scene had reached the cue for their exit line. "We'll talk soon," my father promised, turning it into a warning. "We never stopped loving you," my mother added, and she almost pulled it off. Outside, the rain had turned the sidewalks into blurred mirrors. I stepped to the window and watched a bus grind past the corner. Grayson's voice came from behind me, quiet. Clara always thought ahead. He rested a hand on the back of my chair and waited until I looked at him. "Take the night. Then we start answering the right questions." I nodded. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. Cassandra's message waited unopened. The key was warm in my hand. The house. The archive. The cameras. I didn't believe in omens, not really. But when I stepped into the hallway and felt the draft slip under the office door, I knew the door behind me had closed, and another one older, heavier, was creaking open. You don't notice the first crack in a family until the light finds it. In Bridgeport, the air smelled like fried onions and lake wind, and my world was small. A narrow kitchen, a radio that never tuned perfectly, the distant horn of a train, and Saturdays at Lake Michigan when the water looked like a sheet of hammered metal. My father sold electronics, and sometimes came home buzzed with stories that didn't survive daylight. My mother worked at the library until she didn't. We baked cookies at Christmas and pretended the noise upstairs was laughter. The morning everything unraveled was bright and mean. I came home from an early shift, the strap of my cheap backpack cutting into my shoulder, and the apartment felt wrong, as if someone had scraped the sound out of it. On the table, a note lay under a chipped mug. "Damien, we can't keep going. Aunt Clara will take care of you. I'm sorry." My knees gave before my brain did. I sat hard on the linoleum and held my father's old baseball cap against my chest until the brim bent. At 15, you think you're ready to survive anything. You're not. You learn how many slices you can make from stale bread, how long you can make water feel like a meal. The radio next door mumbled a ball game through the wall. I kept listening for keys in the lock, footsteps on the stairs, a voice saying this was a mistake, a test, a bad joke. On the third day, the landlord knocked with the flat insistence of a man who sees bills, not faces. He said he'd call the police. I nodded and didn't move. When he left, I opened the drawer where my mother kept the phone book. I traced my finger down names I didn't recognize and then paused at a handful of numbers with a Nevada area code, Las Vegas. I copied them into the back of my algebra notebook, the paper shaking under my hand. The note on the table kept blinking in my mind. Something was wrong with it. The handwriting wasn't my mother's loops and patient letters. It was slanted, carved the way my father wrote when he signed receipts in a hurry. At the corner where the ink had pooled, there was a blur. Not a tear, not water, but a smear, as if the hand that wrote it had trembled and dragged. I pressed the brim of the cap to my face and understood in a way I didn't have words for yet. Choice and pressure aren't the same. Someone can be sorry and still walk away. At school, I sat in the counselor's office and practiced telling the story like it belonged to someone else. Miss Harper listened without interrupting, which made it worse. When I finished, she called social services. She also called a number I didn't know she had. Your aunt, she explained gently. In Portland. She's been listed as an emergency contact since last year. Aunt Clara. The name arrived like a life raft thrown across a distance I couldn't measure. I had met her only twice as a child, stubborn chin, cool eyes, the kind of woman who wore dark sweaters and corrected grocery clerks. But her name was on that note as if someone had prepared the sentence months ago. Aunt Clara will take care of you. It didn't read like a hope. It read like an instruction. The caseworker who drove me to the foster placement smelled like coffee and peppermint. I kept the cap on my lap and watched Chicago slide by in jagged pieces, laundromats, empty lots, a boy pulling a wagon filled with returnable cans. That night I lay on a couch that wasn't mine and counted the breaths between the radiator's clanks. I decided not to dial the Vegas numbers. I decided to wait for the person whose name had been written into my future without my consent. A week later, a ticket to Oregon materialized, and with it a phone call from a woman who didn't ask me how I was because she already knew. Pack light, Clara said, voice steady as a metronome. Shoes you can walk in. Bring your schoolwork. We have work to do. On the plane, the lake shrank to a dime and then to a piece of tin foil. I pressed my forehead to the window and tried to imagine the Pacific air, the smell of rain and trees. The first thing I saw when we pulled up to the Laurelhurst house months later after placement approvals, after a final brief call from my mother, I can still recite word for word, was the garden. Roses lined a white fence as if someone had drawn them with a ruler. Inside there were rules. Breakfast at 6:30. No shoes in the house, guitar for an hour a day. Homework at a desk, not on a couch. Consequences that made sense and stung just enough to teach. I tested every boundary because that's what the abandoned do. Clara held the line and never raised her voice. The first night I fell asleep in a bed that was mine, I dreamed of the lake not as metal, but as glass. In Portland, I learned how to become a person who could be trusted with his own future. Catlin Gable felt like a foreign country. I hired tutors and met myself in the margins of textbooks. At Reed, I discovered I could build a chair and a business plan with the same hands. On weekends, Clara took me to Multnomah Falls and said things like water softens rock and meant discipline works, where force fails. She gave me the Mont Blanc when I declared my major. Tools matter, she said, and looked at me in a way that made me want to matter too. Years later, after the diagnosis, after 9 months of calendars turned into battle maps after her last, "I'm proud of you" pressed against my knuckles, I returned to Chicago for one night and stood on a cold sidewalk outside our old building. I could smell the paint, the dust, hear a radio, 2 floors up, the same station, the same static. I thought of the note of the handwriting that wasn't my mother's, of the smear, where a hand shook. I thought of the Vegas numbers still penciled in the back of that algebra notebook now gone. I understood then what I'd only suspected at 15. My name had been moved like a chess piece long before I learned the rules. Back in the lawyer's office, back to the rain and the walnut and the key cooling in my palm, I felt the 2 cities stack inside me like transparencies. Bridgeport and Laurelhurst, hunger and breakfast at 6:30, a radio with static, and a house with cameras, because a woman who loved me refused to be surprised. Cassandra's message waited on my phone like a doorbell I hadn't answered. My parents hovered just outside the frame, claiming guardianship they'd forfeited with a pen stroke I could still smell. I slipped the sealed envelope deeper into my jacket and told myself to move carefully. Next would be the archive Clara left in the house, the files she kept, because she understood that truth is only useful if you can hand it to someone and say, "Here. Look." When I first arrived at the Laurelhurst house, I didn't see a home. I saw rules nailed into the walls, roses trained too perfectly along a white fence, and a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and lemon polish. Clara welcomed me without ceremony, laying out her expectations as if she were reading from a contract. Breakfast was at 6:30 sharp. Shoes never touched her hardwood floors. Guitar practice was an hour a day, no excuses. Homework was done at a desk, never sprawled on a couch. If I missed breakfast, I went hungry until lunch. If I skipped practice, my plans with friends evaporated. At 15, it felt like prison. What I didn't understand then was that these rules were scaffolding, not shackles. I tested her, of course. I slept in, left my shoes in the hallway, hid my guitar in the closet. Clara never raised her voice. She simply enforced the consequence she'd outlined. I learned quickly that structure could feel like safety when it was consistent and fair. It was the first time in my life that boundaries weren't weapons but lifelines. Catlin Gable was another battlefield. Surrounded by children who spoke the language of wealth fluently, I felt like an intruder. My backpack was secondhand, my accent rougher than theirs. I stumbled, failed exams, and went home with shame curling in my stomach. At night, I begged Clara to let me transfer. She refused, saying, "If you want to belong here, work until you earn it." So I found tutors, studied until my eyes blurred, and 1 semester later my name appeared on the honor roll. Clara didn't throw a party. She simply left a Mont Blanc pen on my desk with a note, "Tools matter. Use them well." That pen became my anchor, carried in my pocket through exams, interviews, and nights when I doubted myself. Reed College widened my world. I studied design and business, threading art and commerce together the way Clara had taught me. My internship at her company was brutal. She made no allowance for our shared blood. Deadlines were ironclad. Feedback was surgical. But when I presented my first completed project, a chair I had designed and marketed, she nodded once, a gesture small but seismic. It told me I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Some weekends she drove us out to Multnomah Falls. We walked the trail in silence until the roar of water drowned out our thoughts. Then she'd say things like, "Water softens rock. Patience reshapes everything." Those words landed in places deeper than lectures. I carried them into late nights at Reed, into boardrooms where older men underestimated me, into every moment I wanted to quit. But rules and patience couldn't blunt everything. The diagnosis came quietly, like a letter slipped under the door. Pancreatic cancer, 9 months. She fought it with the same stubbornness she ran her business, but even she couldn't outplan her own body. During her last weeks, I sat by her bed, the smell of roses drifting in from the garden, her hand thinner than I remembered. "You are my greatest pride," she whispered once, squeezing my fingers with surprising strength. I knew she meant it. For someone who rarely said the word love, those words were heavier than any declaration. After she was gone, Grayson revealed something she had left behind. 2 envelopes sealed with wax marked A and B. A was to be opened after the will reading. B was only to be opened if my parents reappeared. The existence of that second envelope chilled me. It meant Clara had anticipated this very storm, that she had spent years preparing evidence or instructions for a day she hoped might never come. I could almost hear her voice reminding me that protection wasn't a feeling, it was a plan. I found myself alone in the study one night, staring at the safe where the envelopes had been kept, the Mont Blanc warm in my pocket, the camera lights in the corners blinking steadily. Clara had always believed in preparing for the worst. And in those quiet hours, I realized she had trained me not just to survive, but to fight, to hold ground, and to recognize when love was disguised as vigilance. I agreed to dinner because part of me wanted answers, though I knew none of them would heal me. Le Pigeon was crowded, the air thick with the smell of butter and seared meat, the lights low enough to make everyone look better than they were. Travis leaned back in his chair like a man who owned the room. Marla fiddled with her napkin, her smile fragile but practiced. "Son." My father began the word, cutting deeper than he knew. "I've been watching you from afar. You've done well." His eyes didn't settle on me, but on the wine list, lips curling when he found the most expensive vintage. Marla's voice cracked like glass. "I was sick for so long. Depression. I couldn't reach out. But I prayed for you every night." Her hand trembled near mine, though her eyes flickered toward the leather folder I'd placed on the table by mistake. I let them talk their words, a performance rehearsed too many times. Then the script shifted. "There's something you can do for us," Travis said, leaning forward. "We're drowning in debt. A mortgage, medical bills. $120,000 would set things right. It's nothing compared to what you've inherited. We're family, Damien. Family helps." I didn't answer. I watched the way his jaw tightened when I stayed silent, how Marla's tears came too quickly, falling neatly into the space between sentences. The waiter set down glasses of red wine. Neither of them thanked him. My phone buzzed against my thigh. A message from Cassandra Wade. Don't trust them. They're hiding more. The timing was too sharp to ignore. I excused myself to the restroom, needing air more than anything. As I washed my hands, I heard my father's voice bleed through the thin walls, low but urgent. If he pays, we've got a chance. If not, we move to the old plan. The words hit like a punch. There was no family reunion here. Only a scheme sharpened and waiting. When I returned, I looked at them differently. Their faces were masks, their movements calculated. I thought about Clara's cameras, her sealed envelopes, the warning she had built into her legacy. And then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Around my mother's neck hung a small pendant, an old necklace I'd given her when I was a child, one I thought she had discarded the day she left me. For a second, a shard of memory stabbed through her, hugging me in a kitchen that smelled of cookies, telling me she'd keep it forever. Seeing it now reclaimed and polished, I realized it wasn't about sentiment. It was leverage, a weapon dressed as nostalgia. I leaned back, folded my hands, and let them keep speaking. Every word they offered was another stone on the pile, proof that they hadn't come to heal or reconnect. They had come because Clara's death opened a door they believed led to money. They hadn't counted on the fact that Clara, even in death, had already locked it. By the time we left the restaurant, the night air was sharp and wet with drizzle. My parents walked a step ahead, their shoulders hunched together in conspiratorial rhythm. I followed silent, the necklace glinting at my mother's throat like a warning sign. Cassandra's message burned in my pocket. The file Clara had left for me waited in the mansion, and my father's voice still rang in my ears, promising an old plan if money didn't come through. I had walked into Le Pigeon hungry for truth. I walked out hungry for something else, proof, clarity, the strength to face what Clara had seen coming long before I did. The game had started, and I was no longer willing to play by their rules. The house was silent that night, except for the faint hum of the security cameras Clara had insisted on installing in every corner. I sat at the desk in her study, the smell of lemon oil and old paper clinging to the wood, the desk lamp casting a pale circle over the safe. My fingers hesitated on the dial before I forced myself to move. Numbers clicked into place, the lock gave way, and the heavy door opened with a sigh. Inside, among files and ledgers, rested a single envelope sealed with red wax stamped with the letter B. My throat tightened. I carried it to the desk, set it down beside the Mont Blanc pen, and traced the wax with my thumb. Clara's hand had pressed this seal, knowing one day I would break it. Mrs. Porter hovered in the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her presence steady, as if she knew this was something I had to do, but didn't want me to do it alone. The wax cracked. Inside was a handwritten letter, the familiar strokes of Clara's pen, both sharp and deliberate. Behind it were copies of legal documents. I unfolded the papers first. At 16, Clara had filed for and been granted full adoption. The signatures were official, notarized, permanent. Travis and Marla had surrendered their parental rights in exchange for money. My legal identity had changed long before I truly understood it. I read Clara's words slowly, each sentence carrying the weight of her foresight. If they return, it is for money. I kept proof of the last payment, $20,000, to silence their claim to you. They will not admit it, but they sold their rights, and I took them to protect you. If they come back, you are not their son in the eyes of the law. Remember that. The letter went further. Clara wrote about the calls, late-night demands for more money, veiled threats about showing up at my school or my job. She had recorded them, filed them with Grayson, sealed them away until the day they were needed. I could almost hear her voice in the rhythm of the sentences, steady, controlled, unwilling to let fear dictate action. Then came the list. Names, addresses, fragments of other families across Idaho and Montana who had reported similar demands from Travis and Marla. I stared at the page until the ink blurred. My parents had not only abandoned me, they had built a pattern of exploitation, turning families into prey. Clara had underlined a line near the bottom. You are no longer their child, not in law, not in truth. If you must let Grayson open the file of extortion, do not let them bend you into doubt. Tucked behind the letter was a folder with financial records, bank transfers, notarized slips, detailed annotations in Clara's meticulous hand. One signature jumped out immediately: Cassandra Wade. She had helped Clara track the hidden accounts, the payments, the transfers across state lines. Cassandra wasn't just a banker. She had been Clara's silent ally, her watchdog in a world where money left trails too dangerous to ignore. My hands shook as I set the documents down. Fear and anger braided together, but something else pushed through clarity. The evidence was irrefutable. Clara had armed me with truth, even from the grave. Mrs. Porter stepped forward, laid a hand lightly on my shoulder, and whispered, "She wanted you safe." I closed my eyes, inhaled, and let the weight of the papers settle into my bones. I was done being a bystander in my own story. For the first time since they had walked back into my life, I wasn't the child they had left behind. I was a man with proof, with allies, with Clara's voice guiding me forward. And if Travis and Marla thought they could manipulate me again, they were about to learn what Clara had prepared me for all along. The envelope had opened a door to darkness, but inside that darkness I found my footing. Tomorrow would not be about reunion. Tomorrow would be a reckoning. Morning came, heavy gray clouds pressing low over Portland, the kind of sky that warned of rain but held back just long enough to tighten the air. I walked into Grayson's office with the envelope B documents tucked neatly in a folder, the Mont Blanc in my pocket, and Clara's voice steady in my mind. The office smelled of coffee and wood polish. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in muted amber light. It felt less like a meeting and more like a courtroom. Travis and Marla entered first, postured as Victor's their lawyer, Victor Klein, trailing with a briefcase clutched like a weapon. They carried themselves with the arrogance of people certain the system would bend to them. Klein set a packet of papers on the table and announced petition for guardianship over our son's estate. The words "our son" snapped in the air like a whip. I didn't answer. Grayson adjusted his glasses, opened the folder Clara had left, and began to read. His voice was calm but deliberate. This document confirms that Clara Beaumont legally adopted Damien Hawthorne at age 16. All parental rights from Travis and Marla Hawthorne were permanently terminated in exchange for a payment witnessed and notarized. In legal terms, you are not his guardians. You have no claim. Silence dropped. My father's face hardened. My mother's lips parted in disbelief, and Klein leaned forward, trying to regain ground. But Grayson continued producing copies of financial transfers, affidavits, signatures. He was methodical, each page landing like a gavel strike. I slid forward the list of transactions Clara had compiled, the bank slips marked with Travis's handwriting. And then I pressed play on the recording Clara had made years ago. The room filled with his voice. "If you don't pay, I'll come for the boy." The sound made my chest seize, but I didn't flinch. It wasn't just memory now, it was evidence. Marla's eyes welled with tears, but they were misplaced, as rehearsed as the ones she had spilled at dinner. Grayson countered with Cassandra's report, a full breakdown of accounts linked to them, proof of money funneled through families across 2 states. It was undeniable. Still, they tried. My mother reached across the table, her fingers trembling. "We made mistakes, but we're still his parents. We deserve a chance." "You had your chance," I cut in. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "You didn't just leave me. You sold me." I laid down the notarized receipt for the $20,000, Travis's signature sprawling across the page. "Here's the proof." Klein shifted uncomfortably. Before he could speak, Grayson pulled one last file from his drawer. "Mr. Klein," he said, eyes sharp, "you're already under investigation for concealing records in a federal extortion case. If you proceed, we'll have no choice but to submit these documents as well." The lawyer's face drained. He packed his briefcase in silence and left without defending them. I reached into my bag and placed one final piece of evidence on the table: footage from Clara's security cameras showing Travis and Marla creeping into the Laurelhurst house days earlier, rifling through drawers in search of documents. The still frame froze on their faces, guilty and unmasked. The room was heavy with the sound of my mother's sobs, my father's clenched jaw, the hum of the ceiling fan above. Then came the knock. 2 police officers stepped inside, summoned by Grayson beforehand, and read out a summons for interstate extortion and fraud. Travis sputtered. Marla clutched her necklace, and both were let out under the weight of the law they thought they could bend. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled for the first time all morning. I looked at Grayson, at Mrs. Porter, who had sat silently in the corner bearing witness. My hands shook, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline release, something like pride. The boy who once sat in an empty Chicago apartment with a crumpled baseball cap waiting for parents who would never return had become the man who watched those same people taken away in handcuffs. The chains they had left me with abandonment, shame, doubt broke in that room. Clara had prepared me for this moment, and I had stood. Outside, the rain finally began. The streets of Portland blurred through the office window, washed clean. For the first time, I wasn't the child left behind. I was the heir of Clara's will, not just her money, but her strength, her discipline, her refusal to be cornered. And as the sound of the rain deepened, I knew this wasn't the end. Clara's estate was more than assets, it was responsibility. The question now wasn't whether I could defend what she left me. The question was what I would do with it, and how I would define the word family for myself. The house felt heavier when I returned from Grayson's office, rain threading down the windows, the roses outside damp and fragrant. I set the folder on the hall table and stood in the silence, every shadow carrying the weight of what had happened. Mrs. Porter appeared with a wooden box Clara had hidden in her room. Inside were my old report cards, a photo of me at 16 with a guitar and a small flash drive. In my study, I played the recording. Clara's voice filled the room, steady and unwavering. If you're hearing this, it means you've endured. I could not shield you from every storm, but I taught you to anchor. You are not the boy they left, you are the man you've built. Spend this inheritance freely, not the money, but the obligation to be family for someone else. Tears came quietly, the first in years, not from weakness, but release. The Mont Blanc pen lay on the desk like a compass, pointing toward responsibility rather than wealth. Grayson visited briefly, warning me the press would call asking what I wanted to say. I told him my first answer would be work, not words. After he left, I opened the drawer where Marla's letter waited. I didn't destroy it, didn't frame it. I left it where it belonged for now, unanswered. That night, I began writing a plan, apprenticeships at the company, a foundation for kids abandoned like I once was. Ways to turn Clara's discipline into a blueprint. By midnight, the outlines of my future were clear. I realized Clara hadn't only left me resources, she had left me a mission. 6 months later, Laurelhurst no longer felt like a museum of Clara's life, but a home carrying both her imprint and mine. I let in more light, kept the roses, and turned a parlor into a studio for apprentices. The company grew slowly, but with intention, adding stores in Oregon and Washington. Every showroom trained young people not just in design, but in showing up for themselves. Therapy stipends and bus schedules hung on the walls beside sketches and wood samples. We launched the Clara Beaumont Foundation in the garden tables, strung with lights. Mrs. Porter welcoming guests, Grayson standing near the coffee, Cassandra managing details. I told the crowd the simplest truth: Clara believed family is proved by action, and with what she left, we would build places where abandoned children could be seen and supported. It wasn't legacy, it was work. Later, I drove to the cemetery with a white rose. On Clara's stone, I carved one more word: Mother. I whispered thanks and told her about the kids, the stores, and how I still woke early as she had taught me. I admitted Marla's letter was still in my drawer, neither forgiven nor discarded, because some choices take longer than others. On the drive back, Cassandra texted, "One transfer doesn't reconcile. Looks like Clara left an account untouched. Maybe something she wanted you to find." Instead of dread, I felt curiosity, a thread leading forward. That night the rain began again, steady and soft. I placed the Mont Blanc on the nightstand and thought of Clara's last words: spend it freely. I understood now. She meant courage, time, and love turned into action. The true inheritance was never money. It was the chance to be the family I once needed, and to spend that gift without fear of it running out.